In the autumn of 1862, a prisoner at a Confederate outpost in North Carolina was hanged just after dawn. The execution was witnessed, the body was buried, and his name was removed from the official record. In the weeks that followed, the routines he had once carried out quietly began to return. A mop was found drying by a door he used to clean. A blanket appeared folded in the exact way he had folded it each morning on cot 12. His boots, covered in clay and tucked at the heel just as he preferred, were found placed neatly beneath the outer fence. No reports were filed, and no attention was drawn. When a second execution was scheduled, the rope snapped during the test. The prison cook, without explanation, began preparing an extra tray each night. Eventually, the cot itself disappeared without notice. The floor showed drag marks leading toward the execution yard. No explanations were given, no questions were asked. The routines had returned, even though the man had not. If you're drawn to old case files that seem mind-bending, consider subscribing. There's more waiting in the archives. Like the video if you want us to keep digging up more cases like these. The yard was slick with rainwater by the time they brought him out. A thin layer of mud had risen over the packed earth, coating the boots of the two guards who flanked him. Neither looked at him directly. The prison chaplain arrived late and left early. No words were offered, just a nod from the warden, and the rope was drawn through the pulley with a slow, deliberate pull that made the wood creak louder than the man's breath. He didn't struggle. His hands were bound at the front, a detail that broke regulation, but no one raised it. His coat was soaked through, the collar dark with rain. His shoes, thin and cracked, left faint prints on the gallows steps that washed out minutes later. No one wiped the plank clean. The drop wasn't long. His weight jerked the beam hard enough to knock loose a piece of rusted bracket. It landed without notice near the base, partially covered by wet leaves. The sound it made, thin metal on damp earth, was sharp but unacknowledged. They left the body for an hour. The rain thinned but never stopped. A private was told to watch the yard, but stood under the awning of the west corridor, smoking behind a post. When the hour passed, 4 men cut the body down. They carried it by its arms and ankles, mud darkening the back of the prisoner's trousers. His mouth was open slightly, teeth visible beneath a thin layer of rainwater. The eyes were closed, but not by any hand. The skin around the jaw had paled faster than expected. A trench had already been dug behind the infirmary wall, narrow, shallow, and already filling with runoff. They lowered him in without ceremony. No markers, no name. One of the men muttered something about returning the shovel to the tool shed before roll call. The infirmary wall, patched with mismatched bricks, had been damp long before the rain. Cracks radiated from an old lightning strike near the upper row. The body lay along the wall's base, under that long, dark scar, where moss had grown dense from constant shadow. By noon, the gallows platform had dried. The rope remained, coiled at the beam's hook, not cleaned, not cut, just left. Cot 12 sat in the furthest corner of the east barracks, pressed against stone and mortar that never fully dried. The cot itself was standard, iron frame, canvas stretched tight, but the way its occupant used to arrange it had become familiar to the night staff. Blanket folded at the foot, corners pinched inward, the pillow turned seam side down, a habit, not a regulation. 2 nights after the hanging, Corporal Anders, assigned to midnight rotation, paused at the door of the east barracks. The lantern in his hand cast a wide crescent of light over the rows. Cot 12 had shape to it, defined weight beneath the blanket, the pillow pressed down at its center. A body. Breathing wasn't visible, but then again, it rarely was in the cold. He counted 41 cots, 40 names. He stepped in quietly and passed between the rows. No one stirred. At cot 12, the blanket appeared undisturbed, tucked as if its occupant had simply turned to the wall. He moved on without marking the detail. There were no disturbances logged that night. At roll call the next morning, cot 12 was empty. No name was attached to it anymore. The sergeant leading the count noted no absences. The bedding had been made, better than usual in fact. The blanket was folded precisely in the way the previous prisoner had done it. Edges aligned, a single crease down the center, and one side tucked under the canvas strap. It wasn't regulation. No other cot bore that fold. The corporal mentioned the sighting to the barracks clerk in passing. The clerk chalked it up to a miscount. Night watch misreads often, especially in the corners. Shadows carry strange weight when the lamps flicker, he said. The report was not filed. Later that day, one of the new recruits requested to switch cots, claiming his spot near the corner was colder than the others. He didn't complain, just asked quietly. The request was approved without inspection. No one officially noted the blanket's arrangement, but a laundrywoman, collecting linens for the weekly wash, paused longer at cot 12. She smoothed the folded edge, hesitated, then left it untouched. She collected every other blanket but that one. The outer fence ran in a jagged perimeter around the prison's rear yard. Rough pine boards bleached grey from rain and old sun. In the morning, before mess, a junior quartermaster made his usual walk from the tool shed to the commissary. He cut behind the fence, following the path worn thin between storage crates and the latrine trench. Near the northeast corner, just before the line dipped behind the smokehouse, he saw them. 2 boots, placed heel to wood beneath the bottom fence rail. Not dropped, not discarded. Aligned carefully, the toes angled outward. The soles were caked with red clay, still wet enough to mark the grass. He hesitated, then called it in. They were standard-issue Confederate boots, mismatched in tone, but identical in make. The left one bore a stitch along the outer seam, crooked and raised like a healed scar. A laundrywoman later confirmed she'd mended that boot by hand 2 months earlier. It had belonged to the prisoner who had been hanged. The shoes had been burned, or so it was believed. After the hanging, the man's uniform and personal items were sent for disposal. The order had been verbal, no written request, no confirmation of completion. The man assigned to the task had rotated out to a different post the next morning. No prints led to or from the boots. The grass around them was slightly flattened, but not enough to track. The mud on the soles didn't match the wet earth nearby. It was thicker, darker, drawn from deeper clay, the type found closer to the infirmary wall, near the burial trench. The area was Q. Whitley roped off. The boots were collected and moved to a storage shelf in the rear armory. No one logged them. That evening, a guard making final rounds paused at the same spot. The earth where the boots had sat held 2 clean indentations, heel-shaped, shallow, side by side. The fence above them was clean, but one splintered rail bore a smear of pale residue, like a hand or damp cloth had brushed along it during placement. No one spoke of it. The next day, a crate was quietly moved to cover the ground. It stayed there until winter. The mess hall was always quiet before sunrise. Just the scuff of boots, the clatter of ladles being sorted, and the thin echo of mop water sloshed across stone. Cleaning rotation began at 04 and 30, strictly assigned. Each name written out, initialed by a corporal, and verified at shift's end. No one cleaned without a listing. That morning, Corporal Gentry arrived early to retrieve an accounting sheet from the kitchen office. The oil lamp over the back corridor flickered as he entered, casting stretched shadows along the corridor floor. Through the open doorway to the hall, he noticed movement. A figure, back turned, pushing a mop in slow arcs across the corner near the stovepipe wall. He didn't announce himself, just watched. The man moved with a noticeable favoring of the right leg, a soft drag between steps, the kind that came from an old knee injury or uneven hip. Familiar. Gentry had seen it before, weeks earlier, on the man who'd been hanged. The figure wore work linens, but no identification tag, no patch on the sleeve. His mop strokes were rhythmic, almost rehearsed. He didn't pause, didn't turn. Gentry stepped away, without saying a word. By full light, the mess hall was prepped as usual, floors damp but clean, pails empty, rags stacked. The cleaning detail, when cross-checked later, showed no one assigned to the early hour. The first shift began 40 minutes later, all accounted for. No substitutions, no early starts, no missing badges. The mop handle used was found leaning behind the dry goods barrel, damp but not soaked. No one claimed it. No guard posted on kitchen entry reported seeing anyone. Gentry returned to the hallway that evening, walking the same path. The corner where the man had been mopping was slightly darker than the rest. Not unclean, just saturated. The water had pooled longer than it should have. No drain nearby. The stone retained it. He said nothing to the quartermaster. He didn't submit a written notice, but the following day, he quietly requested reassignment to perimeter duty. The cleaning chart was not amended. The name of the man who once limped across that floor remained off the books, but the corner near the stovepipe wall stayed cleaner than the rest for the remainder of the month. The man who'd tied the noose had been reassigned to a transport convoy days after the hanging. He was summoned back under the guise of inventory review, but the real purpose was quieter, directed through a sealed note left on the warden's desk. He arrived late in the afternoon, uniform half-dusted with travel, eyes sunk from the road. They took him to the records room, though no records were waiting. A cloth bundle sat on the center table, plain, folded, tied with twine at the corners. Inside were the boots. He examined them without touching. His gaze rested on the way the laces had been fed, through the second eyelet from the top, tucked back under the tongue, then threaded once more over. It was an inefficient pattern, prone to loosening. Not many used it. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. When he did, it was without ceremony. He remembered the boots, not the color or the make. Those were common, but the method, the lace tuck. The same tuck had been visible that morning on the gallows, when he'd checked the man's stance, measured the drop, and looped the rope around the beam pin. He remembered adjusting the noose slightly to compensate for the angle of the man's shoulders. The left one higher, an old fracture maybe. It had altered the posture just enough. He listed the details when asked. The rope was drawn tight, the drop was clean, the snap audible. The weight at the end had swung slightly but stopped within seconds. The body had hung still, no errors. When shown the boots a second time, he asked where they'd been found. The answer was brief, near the northeast fence. He nodded once and asked no further, but he didn't touch the boots. He left the room with his gloves still on. That evening, after dark, a clerk found the boots moved slightly on the shelf, still side by side, still laced, but the left boot now leaned, ever so slightly, inward, as if the toe had shifted on its own, turned again toward the corner of the room where no one ever stood. No report was filed, but the shelf remained empty the following day. No one recalled who had removed them. The execution yard was locked each night without exception. A single key remained with the warden, kept inside a box bolted to his office floor. Entry required dual confirmation. One from the warden, one from the adjutant. No one had signed for entry in 6 days. At morning rounds, a maintenance worker noticed something pale against the dark oak of the yard's rear gate. Near the iron latch, chest height, left side, a full handprint was pressed into the wood grain. Dry, salt-dusted, and sharply outlined. The fingers splayed slightly, as if someone had leaned into the gate with steady weight. The soil below was undisturbed. No footprints, no scuff marks, not even the faint scratch of boot edge against gravel. The weather had remained dry for 3 days. No rain to soften ground, no wind to stir the dust. The gate itself bore no signs of tampering. The latch had not been forced. The hinges groaned as they always did when tested. No locks had been replaced. Yet the print was fresh, not faded, not dusted over, as if the hand had been placed there only hours before. A medic passing through the yard for unrelated duties was called to observe. He took note of the ridges. The outer lines were clear, pressed in firm, but the center of the palm, just below the third finger, showed a blurred patch where the print broke into smudge. Not moisture, not grease, a texture break, the kind left by calloused tissue or healed scar, possibly burn damage, possibly not. The execution yard had been used only once that month. One prisoner, hanged, buried, his file sealed, no other activity. The platform bore no new markings. The beam was still wrapped in the old rope coil, untouched since the morning it had been used. The print was left uncleaned, The yard closed again, the gate relocked. That evening, a junior officer on patrol passed by the same spot. In the fading light, the handprint looked darker than before, less distinct, as if pulling back into the wood. He paused, checked the latch again, still sealed. But when he reached for the gatepost, he noticed the faint scent of oil, the kind used to soften leather. There was no report filed, only a note scratched onto the duty roster margin. Gate check, all secure, no entry. The storage corridor behind the laundry block was long, unlit, and choked with dry air. Stacked shelves pressed close to both walls, canvas rolls, replacement bedding, crates of starch, and lined bins of used uniforms marked with faded chalk. It was rarely trafficked during shift hours, and not at all after dusk. One narrow doorway led to the outer hall, guarded casually from a wooden chair that scraped the floor when moved. Just past noon, a supply clerk entered the corridor with a requisition for 3 sets of clean linen. He stepped inside, squinting through the low light, and walked toward the shelving rack at the end. As he passed the third aisle, a figure moved between the shelves, crossing from left to right, slow, deliberate, holding a mop against one shoulder. The man did not look up, just walked with his head slightly tilted, the mop angled forward. The clerk paused, waited for acknowledgement, then kept walking. He assumed it was one of the new janitorial assigns working overtime to prepare for inspection. But when he reached the end of the corridor and circled back to the main hall, the chair by the door was still warm. The guard on post looked up and, when asked, reported that no one had passed through since just after mess. No mops had been signed out. No janitorial assignments listed for that wing. The corridor had no alternate entry point, just the one door under the iron-framed lintel. The clerk returned to the shelves with 2 others to confirm. No one was inside, but one of the mop racks was missing a handle, its brass ring recently loosened. The floor nearby was dry but scuffed. The mop was found the next morning in the utility alcove behind the mess, propped neatly, with no water stains and no scent of soap. The cloth at its end was tightly wrapped, the same way one inmate had always done it to prevent streaking, a habit no one else had ever adopted. The corridor door was fitted with a second lock later that week, not for security, just to limit movement. No incident was logged. The requisition form remained unsigned. But the clerk, when writing the item count, left the linen total at 2, despite bringing out 3. No correction was made. Cot 12 remained unclaimed. Its location in the East Barracks gave it natural cover, pressed against the outer wall, half-shadowed by a ceiling beam. During inspections, it was listed as open, but never reassigned. Men had begun folding their shoulders inward as they passed it, a small gesture not of fear, but of reluctance. Within days, conversation about the cot ceased altogether. No stories, no whispers, just silence. A few claimed they heard breathing when walking past it at night, slow and shallow, not loud enough to register as speech, not enough to confirm. They said it came in rhythm with their own, as though something nearby was listening to their lungs. One inmate, new, unaware of the hesitation, moved his bedding into cot 12 during evening shift change. He'd been housed near the latrine and asked for something quieter. No one stopped him. The cot was listed as available, after all. He laid out his folded blanket, placed his plate under the frame, and turned in before night bell. By morning, he was gone, found by the perimeter guard at first light, curled beside the northeast fence. No shoes, both feet scratched raw from gravel and thorn root. He had no recollection of how he'd gotten there. The soles of his feet were clean, but the path between the barracks and fence was unmarked, not a single smudge of blood or print across the ground. He was brought back inside. His wounds were packed with lye-wrapped gauze, and his assignment quietly returned to his old cot. He did not request cot 12 again. No one else did either. Later that day, a cleaning boy sweeping the corner noticed something tucked beneath cot 12's frame. A folded strip of canvas, not the blanket, just a single piece, cut from standard issue, folded lengthwise and tied in the middle. It bore no stamp or name, but one end had been wrapped tightly, as though to bind or pad something thin. The piece was placed on a shelf in the linen room, then lost within a week. When asked, no one recalled who had touched it last. Cot 12 was left stripped from that point forward. The mattress remained, but the pillow was removed. The wooden slats beneath began to warp from moisture. It was never repaired. The washing line behind the barracks ran taut between two cedar posts, both blackened at the base from years of coal smoke drifting from the kitchens. Clean uniforms were hung daily, sorted by assignment, with threadbare items stacked separately for patching or discard. The laundry woman worked alone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands permanently wrinkled from lime-woo. Later, it was during one of these sorting routines that she pulled a shirt from the drying bundle, a dull grey standard-issue top with a torn left cuff and frayed collar edge. It had already been scrubbed and pressed, folded with the rest, and tied in a bundle for redistribution. Nothing unusual, but when she reached for the collar to re-stitch the seam, her thumb caught on a line of initials sewn into the tag. Small, white thread worked carefully through the linen backing. JRD, the same initials as the man who had been hanged. She paused, turned the collar in the light. The letters weren't fresh, but neither were they faded with age. The stitching matched the thread kept in the prison's own repair drawer, a coarse variety, waxed unevenly. The loop on the R had a snag, as if the needle had dragged. She remembered it. She'd sewn it herself months ago into his assigned uniform. But that shirt had been sent for burning. She remembered the process. She'd removed the tag before disposal, or believed she had. That shirt had gone out in a separate bundle, marked discard, not reuse. There was no mistake about that. She brought the shirt to the clerk, who checked the distribution ledger. The garment had been pulled from current inventory, labelled as recently returned, folded by a corporal from Block C. No initials listed, no tag noted. She left the shirt on the table without speaking. By the time the clerk returned to file it for reassignment, it was gone. Later that evening, a corporal cleaning the east hallway found a shirt draped neatly over the back of cot 12. Same cuff tear, same collar, still damp. He didn't touch it, just stood for a moment before turning away. By morning, the shirt was gone again. No requisition made, no transfer ordered, but the repair needle the laundry woman had used was found stuck into the edge of her own sleeve, bent slightly at the tip, as if it had been pushed into something far harder than cloth. The infirmary sat across from Block C, its walls lined with stacked ledgers and chipped medicine bottles, most without labels. A single cot was reserved for observation cases, usually heat exhaustion or minor fractures. But lately, the notes had shifted tone. The camp medic, Lieutenant Harrow, had begun charting non-physical symptoms among the guards. It began subtly: misplaced keys, reports filed twice, conflicting patrol logs. Then came the misidentifications, nodding to men who weren't there, calling to figures in shadowed doorways that never responded. Harrow initially marked it as stress, the result of long rotations, inconsistent rations, and inadequate sleep. He started keeping a separate log, not official, just personal. Dated, but unsigned. In a single week, 3 separate guards from Block C described seeing the same man. None of them logged it formally, but each mentioned it to Harrow in passing, in that quiet tone soldiers use when they're unsure if something is worth reporting. The descriptions matched: tall, left shoulder slightly raised, as though carrying a weight on one side. Slender gait, silent, appearing in peripheral vision. 2 guards said they saw him near the mess corridor. One swore the man walked past the edge of the barracks just before sunrise, carrying something that looked like a bucket. When pressed for further detail, none could recall a face, just the slope of the back and the way the left arm hung heavier than the right. Harrow had seen it before, not the man, but the effect. During his first year posted, a prisoner with a fractured collarbone had moved like that. He couldn't remember the name, only the motion, shoulder high, elbow tucked. A compensating posture. He made a note to check past infirmary charts, but the week's logs from that month were missing. Torn out, not filed, possibly reused. That night, Harrow sat outside the infirmary door, chart open on his lap. Across the corridor, Block C's windows reflected nothing, just shadow and dust glass. At once, just once, he thought he saw the same posture cross behind a cracked shutter. The following morning, the observation cot had fresh creases in the pillow. No one had stayed there. No requests had been made, but the oil lamp on the adjacent table, the one Harrow hadn't lit in weeks, had burned itself to the base. The warden's office faced south, its single window shuttered against the morning glare. A thick-backed chair sat behind the desk, worn smooth at the armrests, and a lamp, rarely used, stood beside a stack of maintenance requests. The floor was pine, warped in places, particularly along the left wall where water damage from an old roof leak had caused the boards to rise slightly underfoot. He unlocked the door just past 6. The smell was the first thing he noticed. Iron and soil, faint but unmistakable. When he stepped inside, his heel pressed into grit, fine granules underfoot, too uniform to be dust. He looked down. A trail of dried mud crossed the floor in narrow intervals, as if from bare feet. The spacing was deliberate, each print shallow but clean, dried into the boards in the same red-tinged earth found near the outer yard, the kind of clay that clung to the roots behind the infirmary trench. Each step faced forward, entering, not exiting. No sign of the prints led to the window, and the panes were still latched from within. The door had been locked all night. No keys were missing. The adjacent rooms showed no sign of forced entry. The guard posted down the hall claimed he'd seen no movement past midnight. He had been reading. The trail ended at the back corner of the room, near the radiator pipe that hadn't worked since spring. There, atop a low cabinet, lay a folded square of paper, unsealed, plain, and without markings. It had been creased down the center, folded once, not twice. The way someone folds a sheet they intend to hand-deliver. It bore no writing, not even pressure indentations. The warden didn't touch it. Instead, he closed the door, wiped his boots, and called for the clerk to remove the floor rug. The prints were not cleaned, only covered. Later that afternoon, a request for additional lighting in Block C was approved, without inspection. The clerk, while transferring the request, mistakenly placed the blank note inside the requisition folder. By the time the folder reached the quartermaster, the note was gone. No theft was recorded, no accusation made. But the next evening, the guard assigned to night post outside the office brought an extra chair and refused to face the door. Instead, he sat facing the hallway wall, silent, unmoving, until dawn. The benches in the mess hall were constructed in haste the previous winter, hewn from pine slabs by a local carpenter contracted from town. The surfaces had been sanded smooth but never sealed, which meant every year brought new dents, carvings, and notches, initials, vulgarities, the occasional tally mark scraped by idle hands waiting for boiled grain. One such bench ran along the left wall, just beneath a warped window that only opened from the outside. It seated 6 men during the morning meal and had gone untouched for repairs since the spring, save for a new leg brace installed to stop the rocking. It was this bench that drew notice one morning when a corporal leaned beneath to retrieve a dropped tin. His knuckles brushed something sharp. There, under the seat plank, a name had been carved. Not scrawled or scratched, but etched with firm pressure. Long grooves, the letters uniform and aligned. The name was that of the man who had been executed 2 weeks prior, etched backward. The lettering was reversed, as though meant to be viewed in a mirror. It wasn't a crude mistake. The spacing and alignment suggested intention. Whoever had carved it had done so slowly, likely over more than one sitting. The depth of each line was consistent. The edges of the splinters were still sharp, not darkened by oil or touch. Clean wu-chin beneath the surface, still pale and unweathered. The bench had been used daily. No one recalled it being turned, moved, or set aside. Yet none of the seated men had noticed the carving. No one confessed to making it. A carpenter was called from the supply shed to inspect it. He ran a blade across the grooves and nodded once, Recent, maybe 2 days, 4 at most, not old. The bench was removed quietly, no reason given, no replacement issued. In its place, a crate of firewood was stacked against the wall, creating an informal standing corner. Men began avoiding it without instruction. That night, when the carpenter returned to his shed, he found his chisel set had been rearranged, not stolen, just reordered, largest to smallest, left to right, with one missing. The third from the end, the one with the smooth bone handle, worn down by use. He didn't ask for it back. The gallows had not been touched since the last use. The platform remained exposed to weather, though a canvas tarp had been draped loosely over the beam to keep the worst of the rot at bay. The rope, stiffened by sun and moisture, still hung coiled from the crosspiece, its end frayed just above the hook. The inmate selected for execution had broken a guard's jaw with a ladle handle, unprovoked, sudden. The sentence was carried out with haste. No clergy was requested. No last requests were documented. He was to be hanged before sunrise. The process was meant to be clean. Before every hanging, the rope was tested using a weighted sack, typically stone or grain, enough to mimic a body's weight in motion. The sack was lifted, secured, and dropped through the trap. This time, the rope snapped mid-fall. It split not at the knot, nor the hook, but halfway down its length, clean, like a line drawn by a blade. The fibers burst outward, not inward, as if stress had been applied from within. The sack hit the pilares, platform hard enough to crack a slat near the edge. One of the hinges trembled but held. The executioner examined the break. The rope hadn't rotted. It was dry, taut, recently oiled. No sign of pests or wear. He checked the beam and noticed a shallow fissure running lengthwise along its underside, one that hadn't been there during the first hanging. It extended no more than 2 feet, but ran directly above the drop point. The replacement rope was fetched from the armory, thicker, less worn, tied twice. When looped into place, the executioner tested it again, this time slowly, with a quarter weight. No movement, no give. But as he stepped back, he looked up at the beam, ran a hand across its underside, and murmured something under his breath. Something about the wood. The second execution went forward at dawn, quick, uneventful. The platform was cleared before noon, but that evening, the carpenter assigned to inspect the damaged slat filed a report. The crack in the gallows beam had spread, slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it had reached the metal brace that connected it to the upright. Not from pressure, he said, from a kind of internal splitting. Quiet, slow, like it was drying wrong from the inside. The beam was not replaced, just marked with a small chalk line. No one asked what it meant. The cook had worked the same post for 7 years. Each evening, he prepared trays in rows. Starch, protein, a measure of greens when supply allowed. Distribution was mathematical, no surplus, no guesswork. Each tray accounted for in chalk on the far pantry wall. But for the last several weeks, one tray had been made without marking. It sat near the end of the prep line, identical to the others except for one detail. No bread, double root mash and meat placed last. A preference noted months ago from a particular inmate who used to wait quietly at the back of the line. Always the same request, always polite. That inmate had been hanged, officially removed from roster. His meal sheet was discarded, and yet the cook's hands had continued the motion. Not it of habit, he claimed. Habit fades. This felt guided, like remembering something just before it's needed. He noticed it the first time when all the trays were already plated, and yet his hands remained at the cutting board. Without reason, without prompt, he prepared one more. Set it aside. Same ingredients, same order. He did this each night. Never mentioned it to staff. Never logged the extra portion. He assumed it would pass, but it didn't. He kept doing it. And every morning the tray was empty. At first he thought a rat had reached it, or a thief, but the meat was always gone, clean to the grain. The vegetables reduced to smear, not scatter. No crumbs, no spills. The tray returned to the stack, placed lightly on top, as if by someone careful. The cook washed it without comment, but it happened again, and again. He approached the warden only after he noticed the utensil pattern had changed. For weeks, he'd left a single spoon. Then, 2 nights ago, it had been replaced by a fork, not one of his own, but one from the officer's set. He recognized the worn teeth. The warden didn't speak. He just nodded once and returned to his logbook. That night, the cook made the tray again. Root mash, meat last. But he didn't leave it out. He placed it beneath the prep table, out of view. Hidden. In the morning, the tray was gone. Only the fork remained. Upright, placed clean through the center of the wooden cutting board. Not forced, just resting there, sunk halfway down, like the board had softened beneath it. The East Barracks came alive each morning in the same rhythm, boots scraping stone, coughs echoing through canvas shirts, the thud of footlockers. The cot count remained unchanged, checked silently as men dressed in order, but this morning cot 12 was no longer there. Where the frame had stood, against the far wall beneath the warped beam, there was only a void. No mattress, no blanket, no frame. The wall behind it had been painted, a thin layer of fresh whitewash that hadn't yet dried, still tacky at the corners where it met the floor. The patch was narrow, just the width of the cot and slightly taller, as though brushed in haste and only where necessary. No one claimed to have moved it. No work order had been submitted. The shift logs were clear. No maintenance crew dispatched. No supply requisition for bed removal. When questioned, the guard on overnight rotation said the cot had been there at evening count. He'd leaned against it while tightening his bootstrap. The floor showed scuff marks in 2 arcs, one wider than the other, drag lines. They curved slightly, suggesting the cot had not been lifted, only pulled. The arcs ran along the stone, turned at a sharp angle near the entry, and continued down the corridor. One ended in a clean break, where the marks vanished beneath a closed door. That door led to the corridor behind the infirmary, past that, the outer yard, and beyond the yard, the gallows. No footprints were found, just the scuffs. A single bed leg cap, blackened iron, oval-shaped, was discovered near the hallway's turn. Its bottom was worn smooth, the threading stripped out. The cot had not broken. It had been moved whole. That afternoon, the remaining beds were shifted slightly to fill the space. No note was made of cot 12, no replacement assigned, but the paint on the wall dried unevenly, leaving a pale outline, the ghost of the cot's shadow, a frame of absence. For weeks after, no one slept soundly in that end of the barracks. The men on that row began turning in later and waking earlier. Not from fear, they claimed, but from some pressure they couldn't name. Like something in the room had left, and taken part of the air with it.